Hello, folks. You're listening to episode 9 of the new sports betting podcast, A Mug's Game, with your host, Smeg. That's right. It's a first for the A Mug's Game podcast, as we will not be having Ronnie involved in this particular podcast, which I know will upset many of his obsessive and, quite frankly, creepy fans out there, but unfortunately Ronnie has his own sporting commitments he has to attend to this weekend, and the US Open is here starting on Monday, and so I certainly wanted to do a podcast about that. So we're going to try and lash through this by myself, and obviously anyone who's not that interested in the tennis or the tennis betting, this podcast might be for you. But if any of you tennis fans out there, I'm making this for you. I hope you really like it. And anyone who's looking to find good value bets, I'm sure I'm going to try and do my best for you guys and girls as well. So just before we start talking about the main draws here, which we will be analysing in full, the men's and the women's main draw, it's worth drawing attention to the few bets that we've had on the in the qualifiers. And actually it's the first qualifiers in a while where we've struggled a bit. Obviously, we had a great Wimbledon qualifiers and a great qualifiers during the French Open and Australian Open, but that was before the podcast came. But the qualifiers have been good to us this year in general. But it's been a frustrating last couple of days where I think we're down about 6.5 points, 6.5 points. It's not the end of the world. We really only had very small stakes in most of the bets, and there was a few outsider bets as well there. But it's particularly frustrating when players lose from winning positions. When you've got players squandering match points, and like Kwiatkowski and also just Lepchenko, of course. That was our only 3-pointer, and she had a 4-1 lead in the final set, and basically rattled off 10 games out of 11 or something like that. In the final set, or not in the final set, from the second set to the third set, and still managed to lose even after losing the match point. And those are tough to take, because no matter how hard you train yourself, this is the thing about tennis betting, you really have never won your bet until the final point. And for example, like when you see a player up 4-0 in the final set or something like that, or you're winning 6-3, 4-1, in your head you're thinking, you think to yourself, that's like, it feels similar to it being 4-0 in a soccer match. And sure, whoever comes back and whoever squanders a 4-0 4-0 lead in soccer, like, and unless you're Arsenal against Newcastle or something, but it just doesn't happen. But but like, it feels like that. So you're already cashing in the money, and you already think that you've won. So when actually the other player fights back and actually beats your player, you feel like you've lost double the amount, because and that's the thing, you have to train yourself. No matter how hard you train yourself, and you keep having to tell yourself that your emotions can't help but tell you that you've won the money. And it was a bit like when Stevens, having her backed, and I know I keep mentioning her 150 to 1 at the French Open there at the start in May, and of course she's up a set, she's up a break, and sure you're telling yourself stop. She hasn't won it yet, but you're emotionally, you're visualizing going into the counter of the bookies and collecting a massive score. And just no matter what happens, in some ways I'd nearly prefer if you back a player that if they do lose, that they were never in it at all, and you feel like, okay, I've lost my bet, no regrets, I got it wrong. It's when you lose the close ones or when they lose from a lead. I think most punters can relate to that, especially if you're a horse punter or whatever, and you back a horse maybe at a big price and it's beaten by a neck or by a nose. Like, you'd nearly prefer if it just finished last. It's worse. If when you come so close and you think you have it won. Anyway, so. But look, we'll try and pony on anyway. As I said, the stakes, we had pretty small stakes on those bets, so I think we've got every chance of getting back into profit, and hopefully we'll finish off the slam with another slam with making a profit as well. So we're going to go straight on to the men's draw. We go alphabetical order, and then we go into the women's draw, and we're going to talk about quarter betting first of all, and then we'll talk about whether we see if there's any outright value out there. But we can actually look at the outrights now, and I suppose the main ones. Do you know what? Actually, I'll change my mind. I'm not going to even edit this out. I'm going to go straight into the quarter bet. And then we're going to talk about the first quarter there, where is the quarter with Rafael Nadal. And obviously, world number one. Rafa is in great form at the moment. Obviously, he won in Canada there. He's just off the back of a win in Canada. He won in Toronto, I think. Yeah, I think the men's was in Toronto this year, and I should, as a tennis expert, as someone who, Toronto, as someone who's passed himself off as some kind of tennis guru, he should know that off the back of his head, but for some reason I got confused about that. But yeah, so he won beat Tsitsipas in the final, obviously, and basically won that tournament very comfortably. Won the French. Played great at Wimbledon. Had a classic match against his old rival Djokovic, losing very narrowly in the fifth, as he has a few times to Djokovic. Of course, it's gone the other way. It's a very seesaw battle, that one, over the course of the career anyway. But just to look through at Nadal is 5-6 with Paddy Power to win the first quarter. And if we're just going to look at some of the players, some of his biggest rivals in that quarter, there really isn't anyone that I would worry a whole lot about. If we look at his route, he plays David Ferrer in the first round. It's hard to believe now, maybe 3 years ago we were talking about David Ferrer being one of the best players in the world. He was, probably the next best player in the world outside the top of the big four, with Djokovic, Murray, and Nadal and Fed. But look, he's got, age seems to have caught up with him, maybe because of his game being so reliant on speed and intensity, and maybe all that has taken its toll on his body. But he's just a shadow of his former self. So Nadal should be well able to take care of Ferrer in the first round. I just for in running point of view, I wouldn't be surprised. Just keep an eye out for backing a 6-love score in one of those sets, or in the sets. Maybe not the first, but if it's looking like Nadal is in fine form, Ferrer doesn't have a big serve, and he really doesn't have any weapons anymore. He used to be able to hang with Nadal because of his intensity, but even he's lacking a bit of power in his shots. So I could see Nadal just having a sniff in all his service games, and you could get a decent price at a 6-love. 6-love scoreline in that match. But anyway, moves on. It's probably his next round is either Lasko or Pospisil. Shouldn't be any problem at all for Rafa. Then he plays Karen Khachanov, who he has beaten a few times. He took care of him very easily at Wimbledon recently as well. Khachanov is one of the future young guns. I personally don't think he's going to be. He wouldn't be the top of my list as the next best of the new generation now, but he's still a quality player. Probably will be a top tenner, but Nadal should still be able to take care of him. And then we maybe have Kyle Edmund, who, by the way, I've noticed. I don't know if any of the rest of you noticed that Kyle Edmund is one of the biggest tankers in when it comes to pre-tournament. Pre-slam tournaments, he might win a round or two, and he always tanks then. And he did basically the same thing this week. I can't remember who was actually that beat him, but he definitely tanked anyway. And he's done it at Wimbledon. He's I think it was Kukushkin. He did it against Wimbledon, and. I've seen it time and time again. So it's just something that I'm surprised people haven't picked up on yet. But anyway, so likely to be Kyle Edmund. Look, I think amazing forehand. Just he's not going to beat Nadal. And then our final, probably the toughest guy we want to see in the quarterfinals will be Kevin Anderson. And Anderson, once again, I nearly have to pay a tribute to the man for the bloody courage that he had at Wimbledon, just to come back 2 sets down at Wimbledon against Federer, and then to come, just the resilience he had against Isner, always having to serve second, and to come through that fight, and even to give Novak a battle, even though he was goosed in the final and the third set. What a great man, just a classy man. His interview after the semi-final as well, just so humble, just great man. I'm a big fan of him as a person as well, and as a player, I really think he's the real deal, and he's a genuine contender at these championships. And if you were paying attention to our Twitter feed, we did tip him up at 100-1 in the middle of the fifth set to win the US Open in the middle of the fifth set against Federer. But so basically, hopefully you're on that, but he would be the toughest opponent for Nadal. Now, why am I going through this whole route? Whole spiel? Well, basically because I'm going to tip up Nadal at 5-6. I think Ferrer possibly still catching off Edmund, can take care of all of them in the form that he's in. He's just in great shape. He's really confident at the moment. And then Anderson is the big challenge in the quarterfinal, but you still would have to fancy Nadal. He took care of Anderson so comfortably in the US Open final last year in straight sets, and even though I think Anderson has probably even improved even further, but you'd have to say at 5-6, I'm going to have to play, and I rarely do it. The last 4-pointer I tipped up was Ash Barty in one of the pre-grass tournament events. And that was a couple of months ago, or pre-Wimbledon grass tournament events to win our quarter, I think at 5-4, which he did. But this is my next 4-pointer, and I'm going to say Nadal to win to win the first quarter at 5-6, 4 points, and that might be a little bit swayed by the fact that I have Anderson back to the 100-1, which is sort of like a saver for me. I still fancy Nadal at 5-6, but it definitely makes me more comfortable about the bet that I have Anderson back at 5-6, so at 100-1. So if you have Anderson back at 100-1, I'd imagine it would make you feel as comfortable as well. He's still available at 66. 66 is with a few places, I think, with Boyles. So I don't hate that price. I once again, I still think as a player, as a kind of a match player, he's still underrated. So if you want to back Nadal at 5-6 and just do a small saver on Anderson at 66-1, because I think if whoever gets through that quarter has a great chance of getting through to the final anyway. So we go on to the second quarter, and we have Del Potro is the favourite there. He's at 9-4-ish price. Just hasn't been that impressive of late for me, Del Potro. He lost in I think Mexico to Fognini in the final. He lost recently, I think, Cincinnati to Goffin, and even seeing him against Chung, who was well out of sorts. For some reason, his forehand doesn't seem to have the same pop as it had. Now, obviously, he was great at Wimbledon in a classic match against Nadal that no one saw because of the World Cup, but it really was a classic match. Yeah, if you look through his draw, he's got Donald Young in the first round. Now that's an unlucky draw for Donald Young. Donald Young came through a really tough qualifying section there. We had to beat the likes of Bolelli and Polanski, who's a lucky loser, who's basically got in as a lucky loser to the main draw for 4 Grand Slams in a row, which is ridiculously lucky. But I was hoping Young might get drawn with some of the others, so I could maybe have a play in him, but some of the other players in the draw. But Del Potro should beat them all the same, and then it's maybe Kudla, Berrettini. Not the easiest of second round matches, but you'd fancy Del Potro. But then it's maybe a Murray or Verdasco. And if Murray could be dangerous in the early rounds, his body might give in him later on, but he could be dangerous in the early rounds. So that wouldn't be great, and even Verdasco's no gimme. And then it's maybe Tsitsipas and possibly a kind of a Dimitrov, Wawrinka, Isner, Raonic. And at 9-4 there's too many ifs and buts. I don't really love I love Raonic or love Del Potro at that price. And then you've got the likes of Murray, Murray, Dimitrov, Wawrinka. Murray maybe sevens. You just can't see. Would his body be able to hold up to get to a Grand Slam semi-final? Seems very unlikely. Dimitrov at nines. Just hasn't done brilliantly at the US Open of late. Wawrinka, well, we'll talk about Wawrinka later on, okay? And then we got Isner and Raonic. Isner surprisingly has a poor enough record at the US Open, and Raonic injury prone, not brilliant form. But the man that I like, and I hope this price remains, because I think it's a fantastic price. I hope this price remains by the time you guys are hearing the podcast. Is the Greek youngster Stefanos Tsitsipas. He got to the Tour Finals in Toronto and was beaten by Nadal in the final. But this guy is the real deal. He's. That run in Toronto where he obviously came back against Zverev. Obviously, Zverev wasn't too happy about it afterwards and said that they basically kind of belittled even Tsitsipas' achievement by saying they both played rubbish, both played crap or whatever. But Tsitsipas is the real deal. He seems to love the big time, and the other guys are, outside of Del Potro, a lot of the other players are sort of lingering around the 9s, 10s, 12s mark, while Tsitsipas is 20-1 with Paddy Power to win that quarter. And at 20-1, I could see the young lad. I could see him going on a bit of a run. Okay. He doesn't have the easiest of starters. He's playing Tommy Robredo at 37, who got through the qualifiers. What a great, Robredo, what a great story that is to get through the qualifiers to meet in the first round. But Tsitsipas should be good enough to beat him. And then maybe Medvedev, who's in very good form at the moment. And that's a tricky match in the second round. And then Koric, who's in the third round, who's a dangerous player, but sometimes flatters to deceive when it comes to Grand Slams. And then it would be maybe, this is the worst case scenario is Del Potro if he doesn't, if he gets that far. And then we talking maybe Stan Wawrinka or Isner or something like that. Look, I do think these are guys that Tsitsipas, he has a talent. He's well able to beat these guys. He's got the game to do it. It's not the easiest round, and maybe for a young lad to get all the way through the semi-finals at his age with his lack of experience, it might be too big an ask. But at 20-1, you've got to say he's mostly around 10s everywhere else. So at 20-1 with Paddy Powers, you've got to say that's got to be worth 1 point. Okay, a 1 point bet on Tsitsipas at 20-1 with Paddy Powers. It's a 1 point bet, and I'm going to. There's another guy in that draw I'm going to talk about later when we're going into our outrights. But for me, when it comes to the prices. The 20-1 seems like a good value bet. He'd give you a good run for your money. He's got some tricky opponents in there that he'll have to get past. But this guy's the real deal, and if he doesn't do it this year, expect to see him in the business end of these Grand Slam tournaments in the coming years. So we're going to the third quarter. Where we got Zverev at 5-2 and Cilic at 11-4. Zverev obviously has got he's got Ivan Lendl, who basically helped Murray win his first Grand Slam at the US Open at Flushing Meadows many years back now, but he's got him on board, which I think is a really great find for Zverev. And it might be, Lendl might just be that kind of extra kick that he needs to finally make a proper breakthrough to at least a Grand Slam semi-final at these majors. And you've got to say, that he's got a decent draw. Like Polanski in the first round, Vesely in the second round. Vesely hasn't, I don't know whether he's been injured, he hasn't played in ages. He's got veteran, maybe worst case scenario, veteran Kohlschreiber in the third round. Kohlschreiber is a shadow of what he used to be. Nishikori in the fourth round. Now Nishikori's beaten him a few times, but you've got to think that Ferrer really, if he's got any business, making a case for himself, being one of the big guns here. He's got to be beating Nishikori. And then, it's hard to know. Maybe it could be... and then it would be possibly Silic in the quarterfinals. Now 5-2, he should take care of the first three guys fairly comfortable, okay? And we've said that about him in the past, and he always finds a way to struggle, in fairness. But I think with Lendl in his corner, that he'd be focused, and it comes down to kind of probably beating Nishikori. Or Schwartzman maybe, but probably Nishikori, and then beating Silic. If Silic gets that far, Silic is by no means not guaranteed to get that far himself. He'd have to get through Francis Tiafoe at some stage, and Goffin, David Goffin, who seems to have found a small bit of form. So whether the 5-2 is value to make a Grand Slam semi-final for a fella who's never... he's only ever once reached a quarterfinal and never got to the semi-final. It's hard to know, and I'd have to say even Silic is 20-1 actually, with a few bookmakers, and one of them being Sky Bet, and that's actually not a bad price. But not to say that I love it by any means. But considering you've got to say it's between himself and Zverev if it going according to form. I can't really call it, but I wouldn't put anyone back in the fight to Zverev, but it's a no bet. It's a no bet for me. So I'm going to just So it'd be nice to see a Zverev Silic quarterfinal if it materialises that way. So also we go into the fourth quarter, and then we got that's a big one. We've got a potential Novak, Djokovic, and Federer quarterfinal, which seems like it's not that unlikely that would happen, but this amazing thing about Roger Federer is that it's 2018 and he hasn't won the US Open since 2008. He hasn't won it in 10 years, so that's a pretty incredible statistic considering all the success that he has had even in recent years. So it's hard to explain why that is. Obviously he got well beaten by I didn't think it was Del Potro last year, but I remember him coming through. He was struggling all last year. He came through against Tiafoe in 5 sets, and then against Eugenie in 5 sets, and he was in the opening rounds, and he was struggling. He played poorly against Djokovic in the final at Cincinnati as well. Missed a lot of returns, second serve returns. It's hard to know. Are we finally seeing Roger show his age a bit like the way Venus has been showing? Seems to have been showing her age in the last year or so. If you look at Novak's draw, Fucsovic, Sandgren, Gasquet. Fucsovic is not the easiest first round draw, but Djokovic should be too good for him. Sandgren, Gasquet, which Novak owns, Carina Busta, and then probably Roger in the quarterfinal. Roger's got a tougher route, an easy first round against Nishioka, but then he's got Benoit Paire, should beat him, and then Kyrgios in the third round, not easy, and possibly Fognini or Chung fourth round, if he got through Kyrgios, which he should, and then it'll be Novak in the final. Now Novak is evens to win that quarter. I don't know. See, I would really fancy Novak against Roger if Novak has a really easy route to get as far as Roger, and then you would be backing him at evens, wouldn't you? Really, to beat Roger there. So, and obviously he won at Cincinnati, and because Roger hasn't done that well in Cincinnati, or done that well in the US. Well, obviously he's been to a few finals in recent years, but with the Novak having the little bit of the mental edge, it does feel like to me that it's basically back in the shape that Novak's in now and the confidence that he has at the moment. He's loving his tennis. It does feel like you're backing Novak at evens to beat Roger in a US Open quarterfinal. That's what it feels like to me. And for that reason, and Roger might not even get that far, and you'd fancy Novak against anyone else on the other half of the draw, Nick Kyrgios or any of those guys. So for that reason, I think it's worth 2 points at evens. Novak is worth 2 points at evens to win the fourth quarter. The reason I'm not I'm not going to go with the whole 4-pointer like with Nadal is because, come the quarter final, Novak would probably have a Federer, while Nadal you'd expect will only have an Anderson. So that's why maybe, and if many people might agree with me, people might feel that, well, then you'd have to fancy Nadal's 5-6 a bit better. But Nadal has a few trickier customers on the way to Anderson than Novak. So 2 points. So with the men's quarters, 2 points on 4 points in Nadal to win the first quarter at 5-6 with Paddy Power. I'm going to go 1 point with Paddy Power again on the second quarter for Stefanos Tsitsipas to win at 20-1. And we're going to go with 2 points on Novak to win the fourth quarter at evens. And they might seem like they might seem a little bit like, oh, you're going for the obvious ones there, a little bit. But in fairness, look, Nadal won Toronto, and Djokovic won Cincinnati. They basically both played the final of Wimbledon. They're the form players, and you just have to look at the players in their draw, and you don't really see any major dangers in either draw. So I think they're good. They're good bets. And as Tsitsipas, it's about the 20-1 there for me. Like it is a bit of a big ask for Stefanos Tsitsipas, but he's a quality player, and he's definitely worth a punt at 20-1. So let's move on to the outrights of men's. Is there any outrights where I'm going to use my notes? I'll go back to my notes here. Are there any outright bets that we can find from the men's side of things? And there's only really one. See, I don't particularly love Nadal, and Djokovic is favourite 9-4. Nadal, it's about 11-4. I don't particularly love those prices because, first of all, Nadal might have a Del Potro in a semi-final if Del Potro finds form, and there's and then you'd have to play Djokovic, So, and we saw what there's at Wimbledon. There's so little between them, and the conditions probably suited Djokovic a little bit more in Wimbledon playing indoors. But it's very hard to call for the same reason that it's so hard to call between the two of them, and at the same time, neither of them will have gimme semi-finals either. Djokovic could have Zverev in his semi-final or Cilic, and that's not a gimme either. Cilic obviously beat him in Queens this year. Zverev has beaten him in the past as well. So those prices, I prefer the quarter bets in those guys at the shorter odds than to back either of them outright. Cilic represents a little bit of value for me at 20-1. I'm not going to back it. I know we actually tipped up Cilic to win the quarter at Wimbledon back in one of our poorer bets, and he seems to be more dangerous when he's sort of off the radar a little bit. So he's certainly a contender. But the only one price that I am a little bit tickled by, and I'm just going to have a small punt on, is Stan Wawrinka, and he is in the second quarter, Tsitsipas's quarter, to be precise. He's in the second quarter, and he's lingering around 10-1 to win that quarter. So for me, he's much better value, or he's better value at, or not even 10-1, maybe 9-1. He's better value at 40-1 with Paddy Powers, and these all these bets won't be Paddy Powers to win the US Open, on the basis that if Stan were to get to the semi-final, he's got a major chance anyway. Do you know what I mean? If he's in the business end, we know that means he's playing well. He's going to be an awful lot to handle for anyone. Like he's going to be a handful for whoever he plays, whether it be Nadal or Djokovic. Obviously, he's a great record against Djokovic in Grand Slam finals, 2 for 2. So and just like he's had massive injury problems over the last year or so, but just in recent times he beat Dimitrov at Wimbledon. It's just in the just recent form the last few weeks he finally seems to be finding some form. He's beaten the likes of Diego Schwartzman, Nishikori, Fucsovic. He beat this is all in Cincinnati before he lost to Federer in 3 tight sets, and he won first in a tiebreak, he lost second in a tiebreak 8-6 and then Federer went on to win 6-2. But in a way it's better for that he lost that, because if he had beaten Federer and went on to the final, this price wouldn't be 40-1 as right now. Of course, he also beat Kyrgios in Toronto, and he lost a very tight competitive match against Nadal, and he just seems to be finding something. And he's only 33. I thought he was older than that, and he's not. Like 33 isn't old these days in tennis, and he seems to be found his serve, is serving well again, and. Yeah, one of the problems with the price, and I'm sure this is what Paddy Power are taking this into account, is that he plays Grigor Dimitrov, who he beat in Wimbledon in the first round. And look, that's very much a 50-50 match. I sort of fancy Wawrinka. Dimitrov can be flaky at the best of times. Hasn't done brilliantly at the US Open anyway. But look, I wouldn't be surprised if Dimitrov came out on top there. But if you were to get past Dimitrov, you'd fancy him in the second round, Humbert. Then, these are the worst case scenarios. Is probably Raonic, Isner, and maybe Del Potro. And look, Raonic, Isner, like Del Potro. Stan, if Stan is anywhere near his A game, he can beat those guys. And then obviously the tough one in store would be Nadal in the semi-final. And they had a very competitive match there recently in Toronto. But look, 40-1, I think, for a man, a 3-time Grand Slam champion, he seems to be coming back into form. It's just about a bit of value for me, and I'm going to go with a half point each way and Stan Wawrinka at 40-1 to win the US Open. It's the only real, apart from I've already tipped up Anderson as well, a half point each way at 100-1. But so they're the only two outrights, just to have an outright bet, and I do think it's a bit of value there. So we'll go with that. Moving on now to the women's side of things regarding the I'll have to turn back my notes again. We're going to go back to the women's draw, and we're going to go quarter betting again. So quarter one, we got the world number 1, Simona Halep, as well. This is a fairly stacked quarter, it has to be said. You've got the likes of Halep, Serena, Muguruza, Karolina Pliskova, Venus, Barty, Safarova, Kuznetsova. Like it's very stacked. It's a really, really tough quarter. And Halep and Serena are kind of both joint favourites there, 5-2, 5-2. Look at if you kind of just look at the outright, I'll just have a look at the outright for a moment. Serena is the 13-2 favourite in the outright, and she's 5-2 in these quarters, in the quarter. And it's after seeing Serena, I know the woman is as hungry as ever to win another Grand Slam and to be a champion again, basically. So she's not going to be found wanting for lack of hunger. Is 13-2 a value? I know some people are beginning to believe that it is, and no one really expected her to get to the final at Wimbledon. And in fairness, I think we were all a bit, as punters, we were a little bit dismissive. Maybe we didn't really understand or know enough about the biology. We just kind of, a lot of us were guilty of making that lazy argument. It's too soon after her having a baby. She looks heavy, all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, she got to she beat the likes of Barty and Gorges at the French Open at Clay, and then Wimbledon was a few weeks later. The draw was so easy for her. Like she had to beat, like she had Rodin in the 4th round, Georgie and Gorges, and the fact that the draw actually materialized that way wasn't that unpredictable. So really, that was a missed bet in hindsight, and I mean that because if you, it's not just a sort of hindsight's a great thing kind of point. But if I just remember thinking all along, I was like, well, who's going to beat Serena? And until she gets to the final against Kerber, until she gets to the final and plays Kerber, and really there wasn't anyone to beat her. She was below her best. Now, is she valued now at 13-2? Well, look, if you just look at who she would have to play, it seems like a tough ask. Now, she's got 2 easy rounds. In 2, she got Lynette in the first round. And she doesn't have to play anyone until the 3rd round. Now, it could be Venus, it could be Kuznetsova, or it could be Camilla Giorgi. Now, she beat Camilla Giorgi in 3 sets at Wimbledon, in the Wimbledon quarter-final. But, it was the serve really that made the difference there on the grass, as it often does. And it's it has been such a massive weapon for her on the grass. And I think we always got the impression that Giorgi might have had the edge there from the back of the court. And just in the US Open, even though they're fast courts, the serve isn't as dominant a factor. And so Giorgi is a danger there. Like, even Venus is probably a slight danger. But let's just say she gets past that. Then she goes on to the 4th round. Now, she's 5-2 to win this quarter, and she would have to play Halep in the 4th round. And, Halep has been in wonderful form, as we've seen. She got to the final, or she won in Montreal. Obviously, she's French Open champion, and she's looking really hungry. She's looking good and in great shape, and that's a tough ask. Really, that'll really test to see what sort of physical condition is Serena in. Is she in sort of condition to be able to hit, or to stay in long rally after long rally? Because that's what Halep will try and make her do. Halep, is difficult to hit through. Okay, although in the faster surfaces like in US Open, maybe that's the place to do it. But yeah, that would be tough. But even if she got past Halep, she would have to play. We're looking at maybe Pliskova or Muguruza. Now, you never know what Muguruza. She could lose the first round. But if you could imagine Muguruza getting to the quarterfinal, Muguruza would absolutely relish the challenge of playing Serena, and I think she's a good matchup for Serena. She serves well. I think she at this stage of Serena's career, Muguruza would match up better, even on the hard court, and I'd give her a serious chance there. And even Pliskova has beaten Serena in the US Open 2 years ago. So and then you'd possibly have Sloane Stephens then in the semi-final, and Sloane Stephens would have no fear of Serena at all. And it does look quite likely that Sloane Stephens would get to the semi-final. Maybe Svitolina, but Stephens seems the most likely option. And then in the final, it could be a Kvitova. It could be who beat her recently. It could be Kerber, who beat her in Wimbledon. So it's a much, much, much tougher route for Serena if she is to win the US Open. I'm not saying that she can't do it, but it seems like a big ask. And of course, those are the worst case scenarios there. But I'm painting of who she would have to play. But at 13-2, for me, it's a no bet. I just can't back it at 13-2. If she comes out and wins the thing, I'm just going to have to hold up my hand and say, well, she's the greatest, and she already is the greatest. But this would be probably her greatest achievement. So, is there value there? And any player, Muguruza's at 7.5. You can get Pliskova 8-1. Barty's in there. It's to me, it's too hard to call because Muguruza is too inconsistent. You can't be really putting your money on her there, but she's obviously a danger. Pliskova has got Conchita Martinez in her team, who obviously helped Muguruza to Wimbledon title in 2017. So that will help Pliskova. Now she does look a small bit of value on the outrights at 25s, but she is in the tough quarter. It seems between Serena and Halep really, and I don't know. And even if they play each other and beat each other, they'd probably have to play Muguruza or Pliskova in the quarterfinals. So it's just no value in any of those prices for me. So I'm going to have to leave that now. Moving on to the second quarter. Now, this is where I am going to be placing a tip. We have it's the quarter with Sloane Stephens in it. And Sloane Stephens is 3-1 with Paddy Power to win this quarter. And You'd have to say that it's a decent quarter, or it's probably the weakest quarter of the whole lot. I mean, maybe the fourth quarter isn't so strong either, but it seems like the weakest quarter. And one thing about Stevens is, she had a great run to the final at Montreal recently, so she's in good form. She got beaten by Halep, who seems to have a bit of an edge on her, but it was a very competitive match, three sets, and she's the defending champion. She just seems to be in a good place, even just looking at her social media. Like, she's happy to be back in the US Open. She lost in the first round at Wimbledon, and wasn't even that surprising, because first of all, she was playing Donna Vekic, who was a bit of a grass court specialist and always going to be a tricky customer. She hadn't played any matches on the grass before it, and had come off a run at the French Open to the final. So she probably was a little bit tired, and you can tell, it caught up with Halep in the end as well, when she lost to Sei of Taipei, or Chinese Taipei. So it wasn't that surprising that she lost, because sometimes that happens with Stevens anyway. She's all, if she goes on a big run, you'd rarely see her make a deep run. In back-to-back tournaments. She's just one of those. That seems to be part of her temperament. But she would be eager to. She's in good shape. She's probably playing better tennis this year than she did last year. Like, her run to the French Open final was absolutely fantastic. Played a fantastic match against Halep, who was just. It was just Halep's time, in the final, and. She's looking at her draw here. She got Rodin in the first round. Obviously, Rodin beat Keys in she can be a tricky customer on the grass, and she beat Keys inexplicably at Wimbledon and got to the fourth round, where Serena destroyed her. But she should take care of Rodina, Kalinina. Like, Stevens can be a bit vulnerable in the early rounds, but you couldn't ask for two nicer earlier rounds. Rodina and maybe Kalinina in the second round, qualifier. Lovely starters for her. And then she's into the tournament. Worst case scenario, it's Azarenka. I think, Azarenka, she's fighting hard to get back into form, but she's a shadow of her form herself. She's had recent losses to Konta and Garcia, and she was hammered by Pliskova at Wimbledon as well there, when we all thought she was coming into form. She's not the same player she was. I'd fancy Stevens there. And then maybe Mertens, who beat her recently, but I was watching that match, and in fairness, it did feel like Stevens wasn't at her best that day, and I'd fancy in front of the US crowd, Stevens will be able to get her revenge there. And obviously, once again, no guaranteed Mertens are, she's probably the worst case scenario. And then in the quarterfinals, we're talking either Gorges or Svitolina. Now, Svitolina is at about 7-2 to win that quarter. Gorges is maybe 9-1. Gorges is dangerous. She got to the Wimbledon semi-final. She's probably hungry to do well here. I wouldn't be surprised to see her in the quarterfinals. If it's Svitolina, look, Stevens recently beat her at Montreal 6-3, 6-3, quite comfortably in the semi-final at Montreal. I'd have no fear of her. And I wouldn't really have much fear of Gorges either. In front of the home crowd, she's Gorges is a tough player, but she's the type of player that Stevens likes to play against, and a kind of an aggressive player. Stevens would like to counterpunch against her style. So my point being basically that there's no one for Stevens to fear here. Stevens comes out, and is determined to make and focus, and is determined to make an attempt, a good stab at defending her title. She's got a great draw to do it. There's not one player in that draw I fear one bit, and for me, 3-1 is got to be value there for her to win the quarter and get to the semi-finals. And I don't like a price at 10-1, 9-1, because she could play Halep in the semi-final, who has an edge over her. Could be Serena Muguruza. She wouldn't be favoured. She might be favoured against Muguruza, maybe not. Serena wouldn't be favoured against her. Although I wouldn't fear Serena if I was Stevens. And then in a final, it could be someone that there's a few bogey players that she has a really poor record against the likes of Wozniacki. I don't think Kerber is a great matchup for her. She's done well against Kvitova, but once it gets to the business end of the tournament, even though Stevens is great when she gets to the business end of tournaments, like, she doesn't choke or anything like that. I'm expecting the cream could be, there's going to be a lot of tough opponents, once you get to the quarterfinals, semi-finals, and finals. So the 3-1 for her to win that weaker quarter, great value, 2 points, Sloane Stevens to win the second quarter. So Moving on to the third quarter, I'm just going to fly through it here. Kerber, one thing I'll say about Kerber is that I do have a Kerber ticket at 25 to 1. She's only about 8s or 9s now. That's so that is probably my favourite bet that I have, outright bet that I have, is on Kerber 25 to 1. Backed her back in January when she was going on that good run in the Australian Open, and her price had drifted so much because she had such a stinker of 2017, and it's just so that sometimes you have to kind of watch that when great players who have a bit of class, and then just kind of go into the doldrums for a while, and you have to pounce on those kind of when you see them finally get back into form, playing like they used to be able to play. Sometimes there's times to pounce on the outrights for other tournaments, other Grand Slam tournaments coming down the line. So Kerber's 9 to 4. Keys is 6.5. You got Sharapova in there, Ostapenko. Ostapenko doesn't have a great Wimbledon record. Doesn't have a great record at the US Open. It's hard to know whether really Sharapova. I don't love Sharapova. There's people like Van de Vey, just 25 to 1. It's a big price, but she's had serious injury problems, and it's hard to know what to get. Puig, 33 to 1, could be dangerous, but it's really hard to know. Conte's been sick as well, apparently, and it could come down to basically Kerber and Keys, really. Garcia's a danger. Garcia actually can be gotten at 14 to 1 with TalkSport, or with Sky Bet actually. And that's not a bad price to win the quarter. If you're looking for one of the bigger outright prices, 14 to 1, but you just would have to fancy it's going to come down between Kerber and Keys. And I'm not going to tip anything there, because if Kerber goes on to win that quarter, I'm happy out. Keys beat her recently as well, so obviously she seems like the big dangers, and Keys got to the final last year. It's a tough one to call. So I'm just going to leave that one there, and let's see what materializes. And finally, in the fourth quarter, we have Petra Kvitova is the favourite at 3 to 1. She's 3 to 1 with Sky Bet. Now, Petra, it's really hard to know with Petra. And I think, there's an interesting statistic with Petra. Since she won the Wimbledon 2014, she has only been to the quarterfinal of. She hasn't been to the semi-final of any Grand Slams. Okay, and she's only been to the quarterfinal twice. And granted, those are both at the US Open. So obviously she does like the US Open. She had a good run to the quarterfinals last year. And she's shown a little bit of form here, she was beaten in the semi-final by Burtons, of all people, a week ago. So she's found a bit of form, but it's for whatever reason, it just she's had an awful lot of really poor opening round losses in recent years. Now, she had a poor one to Sasnovich at Wimbledon when she went into Wimbledon as the pre-tournament favourite. She had she's only been to reach quarter. She has reached quarter. And she wrote last year in 2015. I remember her losing to Panetta in 2015, and I had her at 25 to 1 that year. And it was so sickening, especially the way that Panetta went on to win it. It was such an opportunity for her. But yeah, she's just had some really poor first round losses, and it's been happening quite on a regular basis. First, second round losses, early losses. So it's very, very hard to trust her, at 3 to 1, considering the fact that she hasn't been to a semi-final since in Grand Slam in 2014. So for her to be 3 to 1, it's hard to know. Burton's is 6 to 1 with Paddy Power. Now she's in absolutely super form, and it's very. Look, it's I couldn't really put anyone off. Sabalenka is there, 15 to 2. She's recently won in New Haven. Looks a real top player, and she's obviously got to be a danger. Wozniacki is there, 7 to 1. Kasatkina, that's a very, very open quarter, and it's Wozniacki is the Australian Open champion. Well, she has had injury problems, but she's declared herself that she's fully fit. So that's a tough one, So a tough one to call. Kasatkina there obviously has had a run to the quarterfinals of the last 2 slams in the French Open and Wimbledon. She's got to be dangerous. The only one, for me, it's so hard to call. It could be really any of those ones. So I'm just going to go for a value bet, and I'm just going to go a half point on Belinda Bencic at 40-1 with Boyles. Bencic had a good run to the 4th round at Wimbledon this year. Her form has been scratchy. She's had her injury problems in the past, but at 40-1 in a quarter where there's no real obvious candidate, she represents a little bit of value because she has great weapons. Movement can be a bit dodgy at times, but Osaka's in there as well actually, but she's only 12s. There's no obvious candidate, so I like her as an outside price at 40-1 to win that quarter. And I was thinking about Kasatkina. It's really hard to know. The other thing about Kvitova is that, strangely enough, she plays Wickmeyer in the first round, and Wickmeyer has actually beaten her 4 times, so she doesn't have the easiest 4th round. And Venus beat her last year, but as I said, she's lost to Kontaveit in the French Open. She lost to Pekovic in the first round of Australian Open. She lost to Sasnovich in the first round of Wimbledon. So I just can't fancy her. Burton's. The only thing I'll say about Burton is she was primed to go well on the French Open, and then she actually lost in the 3rd or 4th round, I think, to Kerber, who really isn't in the clay court at all. So whether she is ready to be in the Grand Slam semi, it's hard to know. I was looking at Wozniacki at 33-1 with Sky Bet to win the US Open. Now, if she is fit, I remember thinking to myself, there was a time when she was 50-1. This is while the Australian Open was going on. It's one to consider. She doesn't have the easiest. She doesn't have as easy a draw as she did at the Australian Open, and maybe there's no value in that. I meant to say Bouchard is in there as well, which leads me to my only other outright bet that I have, and it's you'll have to include a Hail Mary bet. A Hail Mary bet with just a ridiculous price in every Grand Slam, just kind of one massive outsider, and that is on Eugenie Bouchard to win the Australian Open at 500-1 with Sky Bet. And that's a pretty crazy price. Bouchard got through qualifying and was ridiculously impressive. She won 20 out of 21 service games. She only lost 7 games out of 3 matches. She qualified in less than 3 hours. And she had some half decent players that she had to beat. She had to beat Jamie Loeb in the final round. So she is absolutely flying. I saw a bit of the Jamie Loeb match, and she really was looking in great form. And at the end of the day, you got to remember. Look, she's probably in the easier half of the draw. And you've got to remember, in 2014, Bouchard reached the semi-finals of the Australian Open. She reached the semi-finals of the French Open and the finals of Wimbledon. Like, she didn't become a bad player overnight. That was the standard that she was at. And she finally seems to have she's had her injury problems, she's had her confidence problems, and maybe ego problems as well. I know she's not that popular, but in some circles, but you gotta say that 500-1 is a pretty crazy price, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility. She's playing really, really good tennis at the moment. Whether or not she's back to that sort of standard, of 2014 remains to be seen. But at 500-1, you could visualize a bit of a run. She could go on a bit of a run, and it's nice. She certainly doesn't have the easiest draw ever, I think. Look, put a pittance on it. I'm going to tip up a half point each way on the wonderful Eugenie Bouchard. Well, I don't know if she's wonderful, but Eugenie Bouchard at 500 to 1 to win the US Open. Okay, so that is basically our outrights done. We have an outright on obviously Kerber. Kerber is my girl at 25 to 1. She was my girl at Wimbledon, had her at 16s. She's and that's the one I'm going to be praying for. But hopefully Sloane gets to the semis. We want that. We'd be happy with either Bencic or Bouchard winning that four-quarter as well. Now, only because they're glory bets, but it's tough to call. The women's tennis, the women's is so interesting. It's very, very hard to know. There's so many candidates with a chance, and that's why the odds do reflect it. With the men's, it's hard really to look past the usual candidates like Novak and Nadal. With a few maybe Federer, with a few pretenders like the likes of Zverev and maybe Silic, hanging about there. But the women's is so open, and that's what I like. I like the unpredictable nature of it. So we're just going to go straight on to some single bets. Now, I found it really, really tough to find some single bets in the draw. It's just, there's so many sort of matches where I'd be tempted to back certain players if I knew that they were fully fit. There's some players that haven't played for a while. It's very hard to know what shape they're in, and there's kind of a lot of those kind of 50-50 bets where sometimes you're just better off having discipline and staying away. But we're looking at this here. What I will be doing is I picked out some kind of outsider bets really that I feel there's a bit of value in. And the first one that I quite like is Andreas Seppi at 5-2, Bet365 to beat Sam Querrey. Now Seppi's 34 now. He's sort of a bit of a journeyman, but he's been a very, very solid player, and he's been a very, very solid Grand Slam player over the years. Obviously, he took a set off Anderson at Wimbledon this year, only a couple of months ago, and he also got to the fourth round of the Australian Open, which conditions are quite similar. He's always done well in Australia anyway. He's beaten the likes of Federer and Kyrgios in the Australian Open in the recent past. And maybe hasn't done as well at the US Open, but he still has a few third rounds scattered here and there. But the thing about it is he's got a 5-2 record against Querrey. 5-2 record. Now, they haven't played in 2014, but these guys have basically the same game they had in 2014. I mean, they haven't played, but that's 5 wins out of 7 against Querrey. Add to that, Querrey hasn't been in brilliant form since Wimbledon. He's lost to Schwartzman. He's lost to Kachanov. He had, and a recent loss to Daniel from Japan, Taro Daniel from Japan. And I saw a bit of that match, and his movement was really poor, and he was making a lot of unforced errors. And look, it's not unheard of for Querrey. I'm not saying his form has been brutal. He's had wins over the likes of Isner and so on, but I've seen, like, for example, in 2016, he had a quarterfinal run. After his Wimbledon semi-final run, he got to the quarterfinals last year at the US Open. But he's had some poor displays at the US Open in the past. 2016, he lost the first round to Tipsarevic. Now, this is a Janko Tipsarevic who was basically struggling for form. 2015, he lost to Nicholas Mahut. Really bad losses. Add to all that, Seppi has a 5-2 record against him. A solid pro. Querrey's form is a little bit iffy. It's not like it's a 50-50 shot. It's a 5-2 shot. I think that's worth 1 point on Andreas Seppi to beat Sam Querrey at 5-2. So moving on, I'm going to have to go with another outsider bet as well, which is on Guida Andriozzi, Andreozzi to beat Jack Sock at 5-2 with Bet365 as well. Okay, what is the reason I'm back in this? Well, look, at the end of the day, Sock has lost his his last 8 matches. Lost his last 8 matches. Now, how could a guy who lost his last 8 how could you be 5-2 against a guy who's lost his last 8 matches? Granted, he's played some good players and he's took sets off the likes of Chung and Medvedev, but look, in the slams in particularly, Sock has been absolutely atrocious of recently. Sujita beat him at the Australian Open. He squandered a 2-set lead against Berrettini, who's a clay courter at Wimbledon. Zopp beat him at the French in the first round in 5 sets. Last year, Offner beat him at Wimbledon. Like, these are really poor losses. Last year, Jordan Thompson beat him at the US Open last year. Vasily at the French. He's really lost just a lot of really, really poor players. Andreozzi recently, has had a breakthrough year. He's renowned as a bit of a clay courter, really, but he's had recent hardcourt wins over Albot and Fuchsovich. He won his first Grand Slam match at the French this year, beating Taylor Fritz. He took a set off Kukushkin at the US Open last year, which is, Kukushkin actually played quite well at the US Open last year. So he's capable, more than a capable player, and I just think a capable player who is ready and primed for a battle at 5-2 against a Jack Sock who is absolutely struggling for confidence. It's got to be worth a point. Sock is living on his reputation for far too long in these sort of matchups. So I think, we'd have to go a point at Andreozzi to beat Sock, a man in dire form, who particularly has been brutal in the Grand Slams of late. And what reason have we got? What reason have we got to think that this is going to be any different? Maybe some other people have ideas of that, but at 5-2, it's got to be a value bet at that price. So, moving on to some other bets here. I'm going to go with Di Lorenzo to beat Christina McHale at 2-1. In the women's tennis, Francesca Di Lorenzo to beat Christina McHale. Now, McHale, I know there's been some positivity on her social media, on her Twitter. She seems ready for battle. But look, it's 2-1. It's got to be a good price. Di Lorenzo beat some good players. She had a tougher route in the qualifiers than most players. She had to beat Victoria Sepede, who's a tricky player. She's had to beat Antonia Lottner, who's there's a lot of hype about her being a young up and comer, and she beat Mona Bartel, who's been to a 4th round of the US Open before. So she's beaten some very good players in the 3rd round, and. Look, the thing about McHale is a talented tennis player, but she tends to be. She tends to get very tight, okay? And I just, from what I saw of Di Lorenzo, she serves quite well. She's basically a bit of a no-miss player. She'll just get the ball back in court, and this is not the type of player McHale will like to play against. And I think Di Lorenzo could break McHale down. I could see it going. If it gets close, like McHale could. She could be the one to falter, because she tends to. We've seen it over and over again. She tends to get tight. Obviously, this year, Dulgaro better in the first round of the French. Same thing, she got tight. Dulgaro took advantage. Lapko better in the first round at Wimbledon. I've seen it a few times before, where she's just gotten them tight and nearly beaten herself. And I saw enough from Di Lorenzo to think that she's going to be a tough opponent for McHale. And if it does go to a battle, I just fancy Di Lorenzo on the basis that I just think she'd handle the pressure a little bit better than McHale. So at 2-1, once again, it's an outsider bet. I think 1 point on Di Lorenzo to beat Christina McHale. So what other bets have we got? One match that did appeal to me was Julian Benneteau in the men's to beat at 5-4 to beat Cecchinato, Marco Cecchinato. Now, Cecchinato, we all remember from the French Open, that amazing run where he beat the likes of Goffin, Karina Busta, and of course Djokovic in the quarterfinals. before he losing the team in the semi-finals. What, like he really is the real deal on clay. He really is the real deal on clay. But like an interesting thing, he's only an interesting stat. He's only won one of his last 70 matches on hard court. One of his last 70 matches on hard court, and yet he's still favoured to Julian Benneteau. Now, granted, this is a different Chechen. So a lot of these matches were from, he doesn't play that much on hard court. A lot of these matches were from, a few years back, where really he is a completely different player than the one he is today. But to be fair, he hasn't got, he doesn't have much hardcore form at all, even now. And look, Benneteau has just, he's going to retire soon. He's been one of my favourite players to back in Grand Slams. Look, Benneteau in the last 12 months, he's nearly 36, but in the last 12 months, he's beaten the likes of Tsonga, Silic, Goffin and Shapovalov in Paris on the way to a semi-final run. In the US... he beat in the US Open or in the Australian Open, he beat Taro Daniel and Goffin and David Goffin earlier this year in January before he lost to Fognini in 5 sets. That's really high standard stuff. He beat Mayer for Leonardo Mayer at the French Open. He beat Fucsovics at Wimbledon this year before losing to in 4 sets to Tiafoe. He's playing at a really high level, and even last year at the US Open, he's has a good record at the US Open. But even last year, he lost to in 4 sets to Goffin, who's in good form. So Benneteau has always been a very, very tough customer in these Grand Slam matches, in Grand Slam things, and he's often been a man to give really tough matches to big names as well. And at an underdog price, I don't see any reason to believe that Cecchinato is going to be completely comfortable on the hard courts. And even if he is, Benneteau is still such a tough cookie. I still would have to fancy 5-4 on Benneteau. So I'm going to suggest 2.5 points on Julian Benneteau to beat Marcos Cecchinato 5-4. Now, all these bets that I've tipped up so far. One thing I forgot to mention is that Mikhail lost her last 2 matches as well to Stosur and Lepchenko. So that's also bodes well for the Di Lorenzo bet. So yeah, that's what I'm going to hop on. This possibly would be my last ever bet on Julian Benneteau in a Grand Slam match. So I'm getting a bit nostalgic about that, but hopefully he goes well there. Another interesting one to keep an eye on is Monica Puig has gone into 4-6 to beat Stephanie Vogel. Now. Puig retired recently. She got to the semi-final of New Haven, and she beat the likes of Niculescu, Petkovic, Garcia and Kontaveit. Really out of nowhere came into a great bit of form, beat some very good players, and she retired with a kind of an abdomen problem at 4-all against Carlos Suarez Navarro, and she kind of more or less decided I want to be right for the US Open, and that's why I retired. I didn't want to take any chances. Now, we don't know if she's going to be 100% fit yet for it, but all I will say about that is, if she makes any other remarks, if there's any kind of a Twitter point, if she makes something on Twitter or she's interviewed or whatever, and I find out about it, that she says I'm 100% fit, ready to go, I think 4-6 is definitely a bet against Stephanie Vogel. Now Vogel beat her a little while ago 6-2, 6-love, which doesn't, this is only a couple of weeks ago before her run in New Haven, which is crazy, but like that was Puig had only won 1 match in 8 at that time. It was a final match before Puig went on her actual run, and 6-2, 6-love is a stinker. And surprisingly they've played 6 times in their career, and Puig holds the record is beaten Vogel 4-2. Vogel is a bit of a head case, very unreliable. I think if I get any sort of wind that Puig is going to be fit, I think Puig is a bet, probably a 3-pointer, but we'll delay that bet for now because we don't know for sure. But if there is any more on that, for me she is a bet. Yeah, I quite fancy Julia Dlushko at 9-4 against Monica Niculescu. Now Niculescu had a great run to the quarterfinal, or to the third round last year, and lost narrowly to I think Jennifer Brady, actually, who we'll be talking about later on. Now Dlushko at 9-4. Niculescu has lost a few matches, lost her last 3 matches to Puig, Bogdan and Kushtia. And Dlushko came through really well in the qualifying. She's been an unbelievable run at Challenger level. I think she's won 24 out of 27 matches. You know, she's full of confidence. She came through. She beat the qualifying and beat Potapova in straight sets really well. I think Zarazua was one of the other players that she beat there too. And so she's full of confidence. And at 9-4, I think it's worth a point for me. I think Niculescu is a tricky customer, but she's not the sort of. It's either you have the game to handle her or not. I think it really comes down to, you know, because she's kind of like the female Santoro. She plays with a lot of forehand slice and just constantly putting you know, slicing it back. So she drives lots of players crazy, but she's not really going to hit through you. So if you're full of confidence, if you've got match fitness, you've come through qualifying, I think, you know, you've got to have a chance against Niculescu, who has lost her last 3 games, lost her last 3 matches. So I'm going to just go a point on Dlushko to beat Niculescu at 9-4. Moving on now to another bet. I know there's a few other bets, and I was going to say we haven't really had that many bets to think about. So I do. We'll. Oh, 1 second now. I'm so tempted by Karena Buena to beat Kreuger. Kreuger got so lucky. Should really have been beaten by Kwiatkowski and Hemery. He is there for the beating, and there will be a bet on Kreuger. Maybe if he wins, even if he beats Carbelas Buena, he's going to be hammered by probably Koric in the second round. So that could be a handicap bet, one to look out for. There was a great bet as well with Claire Liu came out as 13-8. Claire Liu to beat Polona Horakog at Paddy Power was 13-8 at Paddy Power, and that was obviously snapped up by punters, and now she's about 4-5. I still fancy her, but it's very hard to tip her up now against Polona Horakog after she was first of all came out at such a good underdog price. But she's one to watch out for, of course. So I have a feeling Kachanov could beat Ramos really heavily because Ramos is in a really terrible form. But I'd probably resist the handicap because Kachanov can be sloppy in giving away a set or two in these sort of 5-set matches. But Ramos has been in really bad form of late, and he's been quite good to us in the past. But ever since he lost to Robert and Wimbledon, he's just been brutal. So yeah, that's worth looking at. Let me see now. Another one I like is Jennifer Brady to beat Begu. Now it's at 46 with Marathon Bet, or just I think it's 1.69 with Marathon Bet. You can get her at 46 with other bookies as well, but I really like this bet because Begu has lost 7 matches on the bounce. She's in really, really bad form now. Okay, some of them are decent players, no doubt about it. But she has a really bad record at the US Open. You know, she's only been to the second round twice, 2012, 2014. She lost to Kozlova last year, which is a poor loss. She's just been in bad form. And Brady, on the other hand, she's had some iffy form, but I think she does seem to like the big occasion. She's been to the 4th round of Australian Open last year, not this year. Now she had a poor loss to Lynette, but last year she was at 4th round Australian Open, and she also was at the 4th round of the US Open last year, and she beat the likes of Pekovic, Strikova and Niculescu before falling to Pliskova. So she had some great wins under her belt last year. She does seem to love to play at the big stage in front of her home crowd, and playing against a very error-driven player like Begu, and whose form has been brutal. She lost to Katie Swan at Wimbledon, for example, whose form has been really, really so poor. You've got to say that Jennifer Brady is, is value at 4-6. I'm going to put 3 points on Jennifer Brady at 4-6 to win that match. And especially Brady also, she won the first round at Wimbledon and French Open this year as well. So she's done, she's showed up at the Grand Slams, which is always a good sign of a player. So I've got to say that's what I'm going with. That's my tip. I don't have any 4 points or 5 pointers here. There's no bet really that I have that I could find that I was just really, really confident about, unfortunately. There's a few other little ones. If you're going to look for a parlay kind of, an accumulator bet that is quite good, I would fancy... I'm going to go with actually just two of them here. One of them is a Makarova and Serena double. Now, Makarova and Serena is playing Heather Watson, and Serena's playing Lynette. Now, Makarova is 8-15 and Serena is 1-8. And I don't like backing 4-6 is my limit to a match bet. Or to bet. I don't like to be backing anything short than that. So adding in Serena there just about brings it to 4-6. Serena's been training really hard. She's she's playing a night match, and she's gonna love the opportunity to play at Arthur Ashe against Magdalene Lynette, who is not a bad player actually, but Lynette won't have the confidence to get through Serena there. So Serena should win that one. And Makarova, I do fancy Makarova to beat Watson. Watson came through qualifying, but she had the easiest qualifying. Really, really easy qualifying session here. Goff, Shimizu. Goff, who's only a junior, Shimizu, Japanese girl, and then Swan was injured in the third round, so she really did have she landed on her feet there. She was in a challenger event where she lost to Dua in the final at Vancouver, so she has some wins under her belt, so she finally has a bit of confidence, which she was low on confidence early in the year. But I just feel that Makarova is a level above. Okay, Makarova has been to semi-finals at the US Open. She beat Wozniacki last year. She's recently beat the likes of Rybarikova, Karolina Pliskova, Alice Cornet, Bogdan, and then she obviously had the fourth round run to Wimbledon where she bet Petra Martic, Wozniacki, Safarova, and then she lost to Georgie. So like this is... So she has actually, one of the things about Makarova and Watson does have the head-to-head, where she won 6-4, 6-1. But Makarova does kind of piss about a lot throughout the year and just kind of, does nothing. But she tends to bring her best games for the slams, particularly in the, hard course in the grass. And she tends to do quite well at the slams. And she even said so at Wimbledon. I don't know what she did. She said, I don't know what it is when it's the big occasions in the Grand Slams, I always play my best tennis. And I just think her best tennis is a level above the best tennis of Heather Watson. So I fancy that double to come in at just shy of 8 to a little bit shorter than 8 to 11. So I'm going to put 3 points on the Makarova Serena double. And also another double that I have is De Minaur and Madison Keys, which is a 4-6 double as well. And that's with Tote Sport, by the way. The Makarova Serena one is with Tote Sport, and De Minaur and Keys. Keys is gonna, she's back. She's really has a lot of positivity at the moment, and she really should beat Parmentier, who. She'll out-hit Parmentier, and Parmentier is a bit of an unforced error machine as well, just like Begu is a bit of an unforced error machine. And Keys can be herself, no doubt about it, but she should have too much for Parmentier. And De Minaur to beat Tara Daniel. I think there's a bit of an overreaction to Tara Daniel's run at Winston-Salem where he beat a really poor Query. That was probably the main man that he beat there. I think it was Kopfer, maybe beat Kopfer as well. He got to the semi-finals anyway, but then he lost 6-1, 6-1 to Medvedev. I think the De Minaur lad is not so much the real deal as in maybe a future champion, but he has that kind of, as an Australian, he has a bit of a Leighton Hewitt quality. He's got that great fighting spirit. He's had some good wins of late where he's beaten Murray, Chung, Rublev, Johnson. Recently got the third round of Wimbledon. I'd say the surface does suit him a bit more. I think with his fighting spirit, I expect him, and his tenacity and intensity, I expect him to grind Daniel down. And so with those two, put them together, you get a 4-6 price. I'm also going to tip up a 3-pointer with Deminar and Keys. So this is going a long way. Finally, just to look through some other little ones that I was keeping an eye on. Buzkova looks a bit of a price at 7-4 against Bogdan. I expected that more to be like 11-8. She came through qualifying quite impressively. I think Konta. I kind of fancy Garcia to beat Konta at 10-11 with Totsport. Konta has obviously been saying she's been sick. Garcia has had a little bit better. Konta's form has improved a little bit, but you just have to worry about her confidence as well. And she lost this time last year to Krunic in the first round. She's basically lost in the first round of all Grand Slams. Of 4 of the last 5 Grand Slams, and lost in the second round of Wimbledon this year. So you've got to fancy Garcia there, I really think, So actually, having said that, I'm actually going to tip up Garcia at 2.2 points at 10-11, because I think, especially with Konta being sick, and Garcia has been playing some decent stuff of late. And the head-to-head is 2-1 in favour of Konta, but Garcia is a better player now than the last time they played at Wimbledon last year, which was a really tight match anyway. So I'll go 2.2 points and Garcia 10-11 to beat Konta. Just 1 point on Mike. I do fancy Zvonareva to beat Blinkova. Zvonareva came back from death. She was down 5-2 and 40 love down against Elju. Basically in the last round of qualifying the US Open, and she came back and won at 7-5 in fifth, and didn't even make that big a deal of it. Like, she didn't, you'd think she'd be screaming and jumping, but she just was, she's just a bit of a cool customer like these days. But I like her against Blinkova. The reason at 4-6, the reason I like her against Blinkova is because she's striking the ball really well, and I think where Zvonareva is a little bit vulnerable is against big hitters, okay, because she doesn't move as quickly as she used to be able to move. But against someone like Blinkova, who doesn't hit the ball hard, I think Zvonareva, now she'll have to play long rallies, there's no doubt about she'll have to play long rallies, but I think her superior ball striking, her superior ability to change directions, should be good enough to beat Blinkova. Another one that interests me is that I might go with the unders if there's an under, between Rubin and Kukushkin, because I do feel that, all things considered, Kukushkin is a much superior tennis player to Noah Rubin, and this is a funky reasoning going on here. But Kukushkin hasn't played in a while. I don't know whether he's injured or not. So that's kind of worrying for me. But I've seen that in the past where Kukushkin kind of comes to Grand Slams with not much gains behind him, maybe because of injury or whatever, and he just comes up, he gets beaten really easily in 3 sets, takes his check and leaves it. And so if this Mikhail Kukushkin shows up, I expect him to lose in 3 sets. If Mikhail Kukushkin shows up where he's actually got great form, or where he shows up and has anything close to his A or B game, I expect him to win minimum in 4 sets. He should be good enough to beat Rubin in 3 or 4 sets. So for that reason, I find that if I haven't seen the price yet, but it's one to look out for if there's 39 or under the 39 or 40 games, because the price is so even in the market. That's where I find that there could be value in backing under 39 or 40 games in that one. Is there any other bets? I don't think there is. I think we're nearly finished for now. This podcast, of course, is only for any of you tennis fans. Before I start, who do I think is going to win the US Open in the men's? It's either Nadal or Djokovic, and oh God, I'll go with Nadal. I'm going to go with Nadal in the men's, and in the women's, that is so hard to call. It really is so hard to call. I might actually, only because I haven't backed her, and just so I can say I called it, Halep. I'll go with Halep in the women's. So it's going to be fascinating stuff. Really look forward to it. If there are any other bets that I have for you guys, maybe just a bit of value on 13-8 on Peterson to beat Pavlyuchenkova, who can be a bit of a head case at times. It's just tough. It's tough to know. It's a really tough one to call. So many of these matches, there's so many variables that we don't really know much about. Folks, we're going to leave it at that. Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I'll have to say very best of luck to all you punters, and enjoy the tennis, and hopefully we'll have some winners for you at the end of the day. Thanks a lot for listening. And remember to, if you have friends that are tennis fans, because this will be the last tennis podcast for a while, a lot of rambling on. If you have friends who are tennis fans, pass this on to, WhatsApp groups, please retweet it on Twitter, pass it on to your tennis fans on Twitter for them to retweet it. Follow us on at Mug Podcast is our Twitter handle. You can also find us, subscribe to us on YouTube at Mugs Podcast, a Mugs Game Podcast. And you can get us on Stitcher, download us on Stitcher, iTunes, and hopefully we'll have the main man Ronnie back with us the next podcast. There'll be a lot less tennis talk, and we'll be talking probably some GA and some soccer and some other sports and some other sporting talk as well, and betting talk. Okay, so best of luck, folks, and please share and retweet and give us a bit of support if you can, if you're enjoying the podcast. Thanks a lot. Bye.